Okay, class. Before I start talking about DFS, which is Distributed File System, I want to talk about a regular file server. So right now, just to explain what a file server is, I'm going to use the IPM server. This isn't a lab that you have to do. It's more of just some information for you before you move on to the DFS lab. So what I'm going to do is talk about how to create a file server. I'm going to show you the old school method and the new school method. So I'm going to go into my C drive on the IPM server. I'm going to create a new folder called shares. Then inside of that, I'm going to create a new folder called data. Then I'm going to right click data and go to properties. Under the sharing tab, I'm going to click on advanced sharing and then share this folder. I'm going to open up Notepad. So we have two types of security permissions. We have share permissions, which are old school, and Ntfs permissions. Sometimes these might be called security permissions, and this is the new way of doing permissions. It's easier to do this on a whiteboard. Okay, if someone is accessing a shared folder from the console, meaning locally, they're just going to the C drive and accessing this, these share permissions have no effect. These are only effective over the network. If someone's sitting at the console, the Ntfs permissions are effective locally. Oh, they're sitting at the console, meaning they're at that computer, and they are effective over the network as well. So the same permissions would apply, but for share permissions, they're not effective over the network. If they're sitting at the console, they're only effective over the network. So if we give someone um, read access and they're sitting at the machine, if we give someone read access here, let me figure out another way of doing this. If we give someone read access share permissions and read write access over on Ntfs permissions, and they're sitting at the local machine, which permission would they have? They would have read write, because these aren't effective locally. If we give someone read write and give someone read write here, and they're sitting at the local machine, these would be the effective permissions. These would have no effect. But if they're accessing that share over the network, and these were the permissions, the effective permission would be read, because that's the most restrictive. So it's always the most restrictive permission that applies. So if someone has read write, uh, read write, and read and they're accessing it from the console, they would have read. If they're accessing it over the network, they would have read, because this is the most restrictive over the network, and these have no bearing when they're sitting locally. So you can see that this can get really confusing if you use both type of permission. So what we can do is, if we open this up and give someone full permission, read, write, execute, all the time, and if this is read, if they're sitting over the network, if they're accessing it over the network, this would be the most restrictive. If they're sitting at the console, these have no effect, so only these will take effect anyways. So if we made them read write, again, over the network, this will be most restrictive. So those will be the permissions that apply. If they're sitting at the local machine, these are the only ones that apply anyways. So the easiest way to set up permissions is to turn off the share permissions. And you do that by giving everyone full control. Think of this as having two locks. If you gave everyone a key to the first lock, it's not a lock. Everyone has a key. It's just, it might as well not be there. And then only certain people had a key for the this door. Then at that point, this would be the only one that really applies if everyone has a key for this. So the easiest way to set up permissions is configure the share permissions as everyone have full control. And at that point, they'll never take effect, so you won't have to worry about them. You only have to deal with the Ntfs permissions. So to access the share permissions, under the sharing, under advanced sharing, you just click permission and everyone full control. That's essentially turning off the share permissions. Click OK, click OK. And then under security, this is where you would control the permissions. So in this particular case, I'm just going to remove the user permissions, and it's saying I can't. You see how this is grayed out? When I go here, it's still grayed out. It's because of I'm inheriting these permissions. So for me to make changes to this, I'm going to click Advanced. And basically, the permissions are set on the C drive and inherited down here. So if I want to make changes here, I got to disable inheritance, then convert all those inherited permissions to permissions set directly on this object. So I'm not inheriting them anymore. They're set right on the data drive. Click OK. So now when I go to edit, I can remove these permissions and I can add, let's just say, domain users. In a domain environment, it's going to be hard to control the local permissions on this IPAM server, because someone would have to connect to that IPAM server and set the permissions. It's going to be hard to control who's a member of the local users group. On the domain users group, I can control who's those users from the DC. For me to control who's in this local users group, I would have to sign into this IPAM server and right-click the Start menu, go to Computer Management, then go to Local Users and Groups, and under Groups, there is the local users group. If someone went and did add themselves to that group, the domain admin wouldn't know, because he doesn't necessarily control that group. He's not monitoring that group. So it's always best to use the domain users group, not the local users group, because then you can control who's a member of that from the DCs, and that would be effective across all our machines. Playing around with the local users group is, each one is different on every server. So for the domain users, I'm going to give them modify permissions. That's essentially read, write, execute, meaning they can read a file, they can make changes to a file with the write, and they can execute a file, meaning if it is something that's executable, they can actually execute it like a program. Also, if it was a folder, when you open a folder, you're actually executing that folder, so that would allow you to open folders as well. The difference between modify and full control is if you give someone full control, they can make changes to the permission. You never want to allow anyone other than the admin to have full control to a folder, otherwise they can go and add their buddy to the permissions and give them access to the share. So you never want to give full control to anyone other than the domain admin. So I'm going to click OK and close. So right now, I'm not going to save this. I can get to that share from the network. I can type IPM data, and they'd be able to access that share over the network. I'm going to go back to this PC. I'm going to drop down. I'm going to uncheck this minimize ribbon so I can see the full ribbon. This ribbon is great. I don't know why they hide it, but if you notice that if I click on C, it changes. If I click on this PC, it changes again. So this menu is context sensitive, meaning whatever you highlight, the ribbon is going to change. So we can map a network drive. I can say IPM data and click finish. And there's the map drive. I'm going to disconnect. I can also open a command prompt. And right now, I actually opened up PowerShell. If I want to get to a command prompt, I can just type CMD. So now I'm no longer in PowerShell command. So I could map a network drive here as well. Asterisk. Actually, I'm going to do help so you can see the help. So I can use the net use command. So I can say net use asterisk IPM. And of course, you would do this on the other machines they need to access the network drive. I'm just doing it on this machine. Now, again, there's my drive. I could do net use asterisk delete IPM. I don't think I need the asterisk. No, I have to do this. The Z drive. That would disconnect the Z drive. If I had a bunch of drives that are connected, I could delete them all by just doing asterisk. Now, when I did this command before, the problem is when I reboot the machine, it'll disappear. If I do this, every time I log in, that drive would show up. There it is. I'm going to delete that again. Okay, so that's one way of creating a shared folder. Just right click it, go to sharing and share it. The new school way is I'm going to go to the server manager. I'm going to go to file and storage services, then click on shares. And I can see this share right here that I've created already. I could create a new share from here. I'm going to do an SMB quick. Small message block is one file sharing system used on Windows machines created by IBM. You can actually use it on Macs and Linux machines as well. Or I can do the NFS share, which is a Unix type file sharing. These are just file systems. Just like, let me right click the start menu, go to disk management. This is an Ntfs file system. I also have FAT32 file system. Well, this is just another file system, SMB. It's a way to access a file over the network. So it's a network file system. And this is a small message block or server message block. And this is NFS, network file system. So these are just file systems. It doesn't matter what the local file system is. This local file system could be FAT32 or NTFS, and on top of then I can run SMB to share it over the network. So this is independent of the local file system. So I'm going to choose SMB share quick. It's going to ask which server I want to connect it on, because remember, I could have a bunch of servers attached to this server manager. So right now I only have one. When I look at the DFS, you'll see that I have multiple file servers here. So I have one server here, so I'm going to create it on the IPAM, create it on the C drive, and it's saying it's going to automatically create the share under the shares folder. The shares folder isn't shared, the folders underneath it are. And I'm going to call it my share, just for a lack of a better name. That's kind of, I'm going to call it net share. And what it's going to do is it's going to give you the local path and the network path. Notice that the network path doesn't indicate where on which disk the actual folder exists, and it doesn't specify under which folder it actually exists. So again, this is independent. The network path is independent of the local path. This in this particular case, this is using NTFS. So if you're accessing a file locally, you're using the NTFS new technology file system versus the SMB file system. Click next. And there's some other things you can do here that we couldn't do in the other way. The old school method was enable access based enumeration. Basically saying if they don't have permissions to the share, don't allow them to even see it. You know, if we didn't check that and you mapped a network drive, but they have no permission to access it, they would see the map network drive, but when they double clicked on it, it would give them an error of trying to open that up. So that's kind of a little bit of a security by obscurity. You know, why even let people know that it's there if they're not allowed to use it anyways? The second thing is allowed caching share. Basically, if it's a network file share and you allow caching, that means when they access a file, it will actually um, save that file locally on their computer. So if I go to our network map, I want to show you something here. I'll come back to that in a moment. Okay, so whenever they access a file, it would save it locally on that file. So if they disconnect from their file share, like they move their laptop out of the office, they would still be able to access that file. In real secure environments, you might not want to allow that. Do you want me to access your data for your student records and then have it cached locally on my machine? And then when I walk out of the office, if someone steals my computer, um, they would have access to that file. So you got to really think whether you want to allow this. In really secure environments, you shouldn't allow this. If you have enabled branch cache set up on a file share, which I don't have that installed, then basically um, let's say we had a remote location and I had a user here accessing a shared file. So basically, um, what would happen is when that user accessed the file share that was on this IPAM, it would cache it on this server right here. If I had turned on branch cache on this server, it would automatically realize that the student was accessing a file share, and then with branch cache turned on and I had branch cache installed here, it would automatically cache it on this server. So if the user left this network, they wouldn't be able to access it. But if this network was disconnected from this network, they could still access it. So that's a nice feature not a lot of people use. It also would save a lot of bandwidth in trying to access that file server if it's cached locally. So that's something that you might want to consider. And lastly is, do you want to encrypt the data on that file server? Um, if I were to do this, I would need to set up encryption keys so the network admin can actually decrypt it if need be. If you get fired and you encrypted a file, I want to make sure that I'm able to access that file after you're gone, which is a good reason not to delete accounts. When someone gets fired or quits the company, make sure you disable their account, not delete it. Because if they encrypted something, you can always just change their password, sign in as them, and decrypt it. Now, here's the permissions. We have two sets of permissions. I'm going to customize the permissions. I have Ntfs permissions and my share permissions. So if you use this new school method and you're part of the domain, it automatically fixes the share permissions for you. The share permissions, everyone full control, makes these permissions non-effective. It's effectively turning these permissions off. Then if I go and look at these permissions, I can see that inheritance is enabled. I'm inheriting from the C drive. I can disable those inheritance, copy them directly to this folder net share, and then I can make changes. I can remove these two because I don't control the local user group. I control the domain users group. Easily control it, let's put it that way. I could sign into this machine and manually um, edit who's a member of that users group, but that would be too much work. I don't want to go to each server and have to maintain the local users group. That's why we have a domain users group. So I'm going to give the domain users modify rights, then click OK. If you want, you can go to this effective access permission. I'm going to hit apply. I'm going to select a user. I'm going to call, I'm just going to use the domain user account. Click OK. And you can see what kind of permissions they have. View effective permission. And then I would be able to see what permissions they have. In this case, I have full control because it's a domain. I don't have any other users created. But if I created another user account, I could select that user, click on view effective permissions, and see ultimately what the permissions they have. And then click next, then create. Then if I wanted to check the permissions, unlike the old school method, I would have to go here, go to shares, right click, go to properties, then there's the two permissions there. But in the new school method, I can stay right here. I can right click the share, go to properties, click on permissions, and customize them. There's my share permissions. There's my Ntfs permissions. So I'm going to click add, and I want to show you something. I'm going to add I'm going to press cancel first. I want to create another group. I'm going to go to DC1. And again, you don't have to do any of this. I'm just doing this to explain it. Okay, I'm going to go to Tools, Active Directory Users and Computers. I'm going to go to Users, and I'm going to create a new user called User 1. U1 is the user account name. I'm going to use our standard password. I'm not going to make them change. Never check this box. If your corporation accepts credit cards, that could get you dinged for having user accounts that aren't forced to change their password. I'm sorry. Um, this don't ever check this. Passwords never expire. Um, because if the password never expires and you accept credit cards, you have something called a PCI compliance, payment card industry compliance, meaning you need to prove that you are compliant with the terms of your bank for the credit cards. And normally you have an outside company verify that you're compliant. So if you change this, you're not going to pass the PCI compliance test. If you have any user accounts that have non-expiring passwords, never do that. Why would you have an account where it says users cannot change password? What type of account would you want where the user wouldn't need to be able to change a password? Well, if it's like a kiosk account, like our student account on campus, we don't want regular students to be able to change that. In that case, the network admin has to change that password. And the last thing here is account disabled. Instead of deleting a user account, you should always disable the account. Or if you're creating an account and you don't intend on using it, you can just right away, you can disable it for the time being. Click next and then finish. There's my user account. I could right click it here and disable the account if I wanted to, but I'm going to go into properties. Go into member of, and automatically every user account that I create is a member of the domain users group. So I'm going to create a new group called sales. And I'm going to add this user to that group. I could also reset the password. If I reset the password here, I don't need to remember the old password. If I press Control Delete, and you go this method when changing a password, you have to supply your old password. But what if the user forgot it? So as a network admin, I can just right click and just reset their password without knowing the old one. So I'm going to right click here, go to properties. Sorry, I didn't do it. I'm going to right click here, add to a group. I'm going to type sales, click OK. Now if I right click, go to properties, I can see that this user is part of two groups, domain users and sales. So now I'm going to go back to IPAM. So let's say I don't want any sales users to access this share. Well, normally I just would not give sales group access to that share. Just don't list them here. But the problem is user one is part of this group and sales. So at that point, he would gain access to this group. Well, if you're a part of sales, you should not access no matter what. So I'm going to click add sales, select a principal, I'm going to type sales. Click OK. So I'm going to go into advanced permissions. And I don't know if I can do it here. I can't do it in the new school way of doing it. Oh, no, yeah, I can. It's dropped right down here. It's a drop down. So basically, I'm going to deny, and it's saying that these permissions are going to take effect over any other group permission. So I'm going to click OK. So they're denied. So if someone is given permissions here, but denied permissions over here, this will take precedent over these. And I can actually edit this some more and just say full control, deny full control. So if user one tried to access this folder, they won't be allowed because they're a member of this group. Even though they're granted permissions here, modified rights here, they're denied full control here, which includes modify. So at that point, they won't be able to do anything to this share. And it's giving you a deny when you click OK. You are setting deny permission to entries. Deny entries take precedent over allowed entries, meaning they're allowed to do something as a domain user, but I'm denying that same thing as a sales user. So basically, click yes and click OK. Now, if I were to look at that in the old school method, go to Properties, and under Security tab, if I highlight Sales, I can see Deny is all checked all the way down. So that's a way to prevent any of these users from accessing the share, even though they're granted that permission in another as a member of another group. Users are often members of multiple groups, and if you don't have a really good group structure set up, you might have to do this. Okay, one more thing I want to show you about shares. A really old school method is right click, go to computer management, and this is often overlooked, but you can look at some stuff with share folders here. You can see all the shares that I have. See this C $? That's called an administrative share. It's a hidden share. I can do IPAM C $, and access that share. Any share that has a $sign is hidden, meaning when I type IPAM and hit enter, it shows me the two shares. But you can create a hidden share so it doesn't automatically show unless they know the exact name. But these are blocked over the network. Any of these hidden shares are blocked over the network. I have three: my Windows directory, my C drive, and this remote procedure call. This is more of a process. So you can access some stuff here. You can actually create new shares here as well, but this is really old school. Okay, and I forgot about hidden shares, so I just want to create a hidden share. So I'm back on my server manager. I'm going to right click. Sorry, I'm going to highlight task, say new share. It's going to be SMB quick. It's going to be on my C drive in the shares folder. I'm going to type hidden. And I'm going to put a $sign after it. Click next. Not making any changes here. I would normally customize the permissions, but I'm not going to do that now. I'm just at this point demonstrating the hidden share, then create. So if I do // then IPAM, I don't see hidden. IPAM, hidden, $sign, then I can access it. So that's something to keep in mind if you wanted to create a shared directory and not kind of publicize it to everyone, then just put a $sign at the end. Okay, guys, the next video I'm going to set up is DFS, which is going to be on these 4 servers. I just wanted to give you an overview of a network share and how to create it before I start talking about distributed file shares. which has redundancy where this type doesn't. Okay, thank you.